They said the mask was meant to heal, but no one ever saw what lay beneath the stitches until it was too late. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, folded with unnatural precision and sealed with dark red wax. The emblem stamped upon it, a serpent coiled around a cross, belonged to St. Emmeline Asylum for the Wounded, a government-funded institution on the outskirts of Calais. Dr. Arthur Venn stared at the letter for nearly an hour before opening it. He knew that seal. He had buried what it represented months ago. When he finally broke the wax and unfolded the thin parchment, the message was short. Just 6 words written in hurried, trembling script. "She still breathes. Come at once." It was unsigned. But the handwriting, he recognized it immediately. It belonged to matron Cecile Aubert, the head nurse who had assisted him in his final surgery at the asylum. The surgery that had ended in failure. The surgery that had killed Elise Marin. He dropped the letter on his desk, staring blankly through the window at the morning fog. Outside, the streets of Calais moved in grey silence. Horse carts rolled over cobblestones. A distant church bell rang 9 times. Everything looked ordinary, painfully ordinary, and that was what made the message feel even more impossible. Elise was dead. He had seen her stop breathing on the table, felt her pulse fade beneath his fingers. He had watched the light leave her eyes. He had written her death certificate himself. She was gone. She had to be, and yet the letter said otherwise. By nightfall, Arthur was already on the train to the northern marshlands. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against rails echoed like a heartbeat in his ears. He hadn't been back to St. Emmeline in months, not since the explosion at the munitions plant that had sent dozens of women to the wards, their faces torn by flying shrapnel, their bodies burned beyond recognition. He could still smell the smoke when he closed his eyes. Elise had been one of them. He remembered the day she was brought in, her skin burned, her jaw fractured, her face a mosaic of red and black, yet she was alive. Barely. When she awoke, she refused the morphine, refused even to cry. Her voice was calm, steady, almost serene as she asked, "Can I still smile?" That question haunted him ever since. In that moment, something inside him cracked. He promised her to make her smile again, not with pity or mercy, but through science, through his work. The stitched mask experiment was born from that promise. He told the board it was a medical break through the future of reconstructive surgery. He spoke of silk sutures lined with a new antiseptic compound that could fuse grafted skin faster than ever before. He spoke of giving disfigured victims a chance to live without shame, without fear. But in truth, he was chasing something darker. Arthur Venn wanted to erase death itself to prove that the human form could be rebuilt if one was willing to cross far enough into forbidden ground. And Elise was his willing subject, or at least she had been at first. The train screeched to a stop near the coastal fields. From there, the asylum was a half-hour walk through mist and silence. The building emerged like a shadow from the fog, tall, gray, and weary. The windows were boarded, and the main gate hung crooked on rusted hinges. As Arthur approached, he saw that the courtyard was empty except for a single lantern flickering near the entrance. Matron Aubert waited there, her uniform faded, her eyes sunken. "You came," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you would." Arthur tried to steady his voice. "You wrote that she's alive. Tell me this isn't a cruel joke." Aubert hesitated, glancing back toward the dark corridor. "Alive isn't the word I would use. What do you mean?" She didn't answer. She simply turned and motioned for him to follow. The halls of St. Emmeline were not as he remembered. Paint peeled like old skin from the walls. The once sterile scent of antiseptic had long been replaced by damp rot. His footsteps echoed faintly, each one swallowed by the heavy air. As they walked, Aubert spoke softly. "After you left, the board ordered your laboratory sealed. They wanted no trace of your experiment to remain, but there were whispers. The night we buried her, the nurses heard something in the cellar. They said she moved. That's impossible," Arthur muttered. Aubert stopped in front of a locked door. "Then you'll tell me what this is?" She unlocked it with trembling hands and pushed it open. Inside was a small ward, dimly lit by an oil lamp. A single bed stood in the center of the room. On it lay a woman, thin, frail, motionless. Her face was covered with a pale mask of skin, stitched delicately from jaw to temple. The seams were dark with dried blood. Yet beneath them, faintly, something pulsed. Arthur froze. "Elise," he whispered. Her eyes opened. For a long, unbearable moment, neither of them moved. Her irises were the same deep gray he remembered, though now they looked clouded, distant, like someone seeing through water. She studied him quietly, then raised one trembling hand. "Arthur," she said, her voice brittle as glass, "you promised." The sound of her voice was enough to make him stumble back. He pressed his hand to his chest, as if to steady his own heart. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her lips moved slowly, each word pulling at the stitches. "You said I'd be beautiful again." Tears blurred his vision. "You were never supposed to wake up, Elise." "I tried to." He stopped himself. He had no words that could justify this. He had meant to save her, to restore her face by grafting preserved tissue from cadavers, connected through silk sutures treated with a nerve-binding serum. It was supposed to reattach dead flesh to living nerves. But something had gone wrong. The serum didn't merely fuse, it spread, carrying fragments of dead cells into living tissue, corrupting it. He thought it had killed her. But now, looking at her chest rise and fall, seeing the faint movement beneath the stitched skin, he realized the truth. The serum hadn't failed. It had worked too well. Arthur spent the night in the ward, unable to leave her side. He examined her vitals, her temperature, her pulse. Everything defied medicine. Her body was alive, yet her skin temperature was cold to the touch. The stitched tissue responded to touch, twitching faintly, like something aware. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Her gaze wandered toward the ceiling. "They sing to me," she murmured. "Who does?" "The others." Arthur frowned. "What others?" "The ones you stitched before me." He froze. There were no others. But she only smiled, a weak, tragic smile that pulled the seams of her mask into a grimace. "You forget, Arthur. You weren't the only one who wanted to heal me." He turned to Aubert. "What is she talking about?" The matron's hands trembled. "After the board shut you down, some of the doctors, they tried to continue your work. Quietly, they said it was mercy for the soldiers, for the women. We didn't have enough morphine or supplies, and your notes offered hope. But then the patients started to change. Change how?" Their faces stopped healing. The skin, she swallowed hard, it moved, it learned. Arthur backed away from the bed. He could feel Elise's eyes following him. Something inside him screamed to run, but another part the scientist needed to see, to understand. He leaned closer. "Elise, may I look beneath the mask?" She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. With trembling hands, he lifted the corner of the stitched layer. What he saw made his stomach twist. Beneath the mask, the skin wasn't her own. It was growing. Layers of pale tissue spread like veins across her face, pulsing softly with each heartbeat. The grafts had fused entirely with her nerves, creating something between life and death. The stitches weren't holding her together anymore. They were keeping her from falling apart. Arthur staggered back, bile rising in his throat. "My God, you gave me life," she whispered, "and they gave me company." Who are they?" She smiled faintly. "The ones who came after." That night the asylum changed. It began with a faint humming, distant, almost like a lullaby carried through the vents. Aubert had gone to fetch fresh linens, leaving Arthur alone in the ward. He sat by Elise's bedside, trying to silence the voice in his head that whispered, "You did this." The humming grew louder. He turned toward the door and froze. In the hallway beyond, shadows moved. Silhouettes of figures swaying gently, their heads bent, their faces hidden by stitched veils. The sound wasn't coming from one throat, it was many, a chorus of low, hollow humming. He stepped forward cautiously. "Who's there?" The humming stopped. Then from the darkness, one of the figures stepped into the light. It was a nurse, or what used to be one. Her uniform was stained with blood, her face crudely stitched, the seams forming a grotesque smile. Her eyes were empty sockets filled with dark, writhing tissue. Arthur stumbled backward. Dear God, more figures appeared, patients, doctors, attendants, all wearing pieces of human skin, crudely sewn in place. Some were missing jaws, others had mouths stitched shut. Yet they all moved in sync, calm, deliberate. Elise's voice broke the silence. "Don't be afraid, Arthur. They just want to be remembered." He turned toward her and froze again. She was standing now, the mask glistening in the dim light. Her movements were slow but graceful, her expression serene. "They were forgotten, left to rot in the dark, but I kept them close. I gave them what you gave me." Arthur's voice trembled. "You, what have you done?" "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "They came to me. They wanted faces, Arthur, faces that could smile again." He shook his head violently. No, this is wrong. You're sick. I can fix this." She tilted her head. "Can you? You fixed me once. Remember." Her tone was both tender and cruel, the voice of someone who remembered pain but no longer felt it. Arthur backed away, clutching a lantern. "Stay back." Her eyes glimmered. "You promised you'd make me beautiful again. You just never said whose beauty I'd wear." The light flickered. The figures began to hum again. The sound swelled, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the air itself. Arthur turned and ran. He fled through the corridors, stumbling over broken stretchers and shattered glass. The asylum had become a labyrinth, hallways bending where they shouldn't, doors leading to rooms that weren't there before. Every echo of his footsteps was answered by the soft hum behind him. He burst into his old laboratory, slamming the door shut. His journals still lay there, scattered across the desk. The pages were stained with ink and blood. His own handwriting stared back at him, diagrams of nerve patterns, graft instructions, serum ratios. At the bottom of one page, he had once written, "The body remembers everything." He hadn't understood what that meant until now. The serum hadn't just fused nerves, it had preserved memory in the tissue itself. Every grafted piece of skin still remembered the person it once belonged to. Elise wasn't haunted, she was inhabited. He lit the lantern, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. He had to end it. Burn it all, destroy every trace of his work. But then a shadow moved across the wall. He turned. Elise stood in the doorway. Her mask was peeling now, the stitches tearing with each word. "You don't understand, Arthur. They're not monsters. They're your children." He shook his head. "No, they're abominations. They're what you made me." Her voice rose, a sound of grief and rage entwined. The air around her seemed to shimmer, her shadow splitting into many. The hum became a wail. The walls quivered, bottles shattered. Arthur stumbled backward, clutching his chest. "Elise, please." But before he could speak again, she lifted her hand. Her fingers touched the stitches at her jaw and pulled. The mask came away in a slow, wet tear. What lay beneath wasn't flesh anymore. It was movement, layers upon layers of living tissue, twisting, growing, reshaping. Her face was a canvas of everything he'd ever stitched, all the women, all the soldiers, all the lives he had tried to mend. Their features flickered across her face like ghosts, merging into one another, 1,000 souls whispering through one mouth. "Look at me," she said, her voice echoing with many tones. "You wanted to heal us. Now you can't tell where one ends and another begins." Arthur fell to his knees. "I never meant," she knelt beside him, her cold hand touching his cheek. "You never meant to feel. That's why it hurts now." He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "Kill me." She smiled. "No, you'll live like me." The humming swelled to a roar. The air became heat and blood and light. When the ward guards arrived the next morning, they found the laboratory burned to ash. The patients were gone. Only one thing remained, a mask, pale, stitched, still warm to the touch. Inside its lining, written in trembling ink, were 5 words, "She still breathes, forgive me." That was 1914. The asylum closed months later. Its name was erased from records. The surviving staff dispersed, sworn to silence. But some nights, when the wind passes over the ruins of Calais, locals say they hear humming soft and sorrowful, and sometimes a woman's voice whispering through the fog, "You promised I'd smile again." That was the first thought that entered Lee Durrant's mind the moment she found it online. It was posted on a forgotten archive forum, one of those digital graveyards where people shared old medical curiosities, abandoned asylums, and early 20th century artifacts. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary historical image, a black and white portrait of a woman sitting in a hospital chair, wearing a tattered medical gown, but there was something about her face. It wasn't blurred, it was stitched. Lee zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. Across the woman's jaw and eyes ran a network of uneven sutures. The stitches formed a grotesque mask, sealing parts of her face completely shut. Yet somehow, her eyes still shone through glassy, wet, and alive. The photo's caption read only, Lee frowned. She was no stranger to morbid imagery. She'd been photographing ruins for years, documenting forgotten places and the stories buried within them. But this one was different. This one looked back at her. She downloaded the image, cropped it, enhanced it, and stared. The light in the photograph didn't match early 1900s exposure. The detail was too sharp, too clear, as if it hadn't aged a day. And then she noticed something else. In the reflection of a metal tray beside the woman's chair, there was another figure, a man in a white coat, standing behind her, his face turned slightly away. His hands rested on her shoulders, gentle, protective, almost reverent. On his collar, a small emblem, a serpent coiled around a cross. Lee's heart quickened. She had seen that symbol before in a medical ledger she found during her last exploration, inside the ruins of an abandoned French hospital near Calais. The same serpent, the same cross, the same initials scratched beneath it, AV. Lee's obsession began that night. She stayed up until dawn combing the internet for any mention of St. Emmeline Asylum. There was nothing. Not in official archives, not in medical registries, not even in urban legend sites. It was as though the place had been erased entirely from history. But buried deep in a university database, she found a scanned letter dated 1915, unsigned and barely legible. The building is sealed. The fires took most of it, but something still breathes beneath the floors. If anyone finds this, burn everything, especially the photographs. Lee leaned back in her chair, her pulse racing. Burn the photographs. It sounded like superstition or guilt. Either way, she knew what she had to do. She packed her camera, flashlight, and recorder, and booked a ticket to Calais. The ruins of St. Emmeline Asylum stood miles beyond the town, hidden behind overgrown hedges and the skeletons of old oak trees. The locals refused to talk about it. When Lee asked for directions, they simply shook their heads or muttered that the land was cursed. By the time she reached it, dusk had already begun to fall. The building rose before her like a grave monument, gray stone walls, windows bordered with splintered wood, and a tower that leaned slightly, as though exhausted by its own history. Moss grew thick between the cracks, swallowing the last traces of the past. She set up her camera, whispering into the recorder, location, St. Emmeline Asylum, time 7:14 p.m., objective, explore, document, verify authenticity of the stitched woman photograph. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, not yet, but from the weight of what she was about to uncover. The main doors were jammed, so she entered through a broken window. Inside, dust hung heavy in the air, shimmering in the beam of her flashlight. Floor creaked with every step. She passed a corridor lined with rusted wheelchairs and broken gurneys. Faded medical charts still clung to the walls. At the far end, she found a wooden sign half buried beneath debris. The letters were faded, but she could still read them. Her heart leapt. That was where the woman in the photograph must have been. She filmed everything: the shattered glass cabinets, the scattered instruments, the smell of decay that lingered even after a century. But as she reached the end of the corridor, she noticed something odd. The air was warmer, faintly humming, almost vibrating. She turned off her flashlight. Silence, then softly a hum, a woman's voice. Distant, delicate, mournful. It echoed through the walls like a lullaby carried by the wind. Lee froze. Hello, she whispered. Is someone here? No answer. She lifted her camera and began recording. Through the lens, the hall looked darker, deeper than before. The shadows seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them, and then her light caught a door. A single word carved into it with something sharp. The door wasn't locked. It simply groaned as she pushed it open. Inside was a room frozen in time. On one wall hung dozens of photographs, hundreds, perhaps all pinned in perfect rows. They were portraits, each showing the same woman at different stages. In some, her face was almost human. In others, the stitches had spread further, the skin pulling tighter. And in every one, her eyes stared straight ahead as though aware of the camera. In the corner stood a desk with a rusted nameplate, Doctor. Arthur Venn. Lee whispered the name aloud. A.V. The sound of her voice seemed to stir the room. Dust swirled gently, and somewhere in the shadows, a faint hum rose again. She turned toward the source, a large, cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. The surface was cloudy, distorted by time, but as she stepped closer, she realized something was off. Her reflection didn't match her movement perfectly. There was a half-second delay, as though the glass was thinking before responding. Lee's stomach tightened. She lifted her camera to capture it and gasped. In the camera's lens, her reflection wasn't her. It was the woman from the photograph, the same stitched mask, the same hollow eyes staring back. She stumbled backward, the camera clattering to the floor. The hum grew louder now, spreading through the air like static. It wasn't just one voice anymore, it was many. Dozens of overlapping whispers rising and falling in unison. "Do you remember me? You promised I'd leave forever. You promised." Lee snatched the camera, turned and ran. The hallways twisted endlessly. Every corridor looked the same. The light from her flashlight flickered, her breath sharp and uneven. She could still hear the hum following her, moving through the vents, the walls, the floor. She burst into what looked like an operating theater, the old surgical room, its tiled walls cracked and peeling. Tables lay overturned, scalpels scattered, jars filled with murky fluid, and on the center table a camera, an old wooden model, its bellows intact, its lens pointed toward the far wall. Lee lifted it gently. It was still loaded with film. On the wall before it hung a single photograph, faded, sepia, framed in black. It showed Dr. Arthur Venn standing beside a patient, Elise Marin. Her stitched mask perfectly symmetrical now, her posture upright, almost regal. But what made Lee's heart stop was not the mask, it was Arthur's face. He too was stitched. The seams ran along his mouth, his temples, even his eyelids, but he was smiling, proudly, peacefully. As though the mask had become part of him. Beneath the photo, a caption carved directly into the frame read. Lee staggered backward. Her mind swam. Was this the end of the experiment? The doctor becoming his creation? The whispers returned, softer now, almost tender. "He stayed with me. He saw beauty in what he made. He couldn't leave." Lee turned toward the sound. In the reflection of a metal tray on the floor, she saw movement behind her, a pale figure standing in the doorway. "Elise," she breathed. The woman stepped forward, each movement slow and deliberate. Her mask shimmered in the flickering light, not static, but alive. The seams pulsed faintly, as though blood still ran beneath. Her eyes were kind, almost sorrowful. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. Lee's voice trembled. "You're real." "I am what he made," Elise replied, "and what he made never died." Lee lifted her camera slowly. "I just want to know the truth." Elise tilted her head. "Truth? There is no truth here, only memory. You came because you saw me, didn't you? You looked too long." Lee swallowed hard. "The photograph." "It's not a photograph," Elise whispered. "It's a window. Every time someone looks, it opens a little wider. You let us through." The hum deepened, surrounding them. Lee's flashlight flickered violently. Shapes moved in the shadows, faint outlines of faces stitched together, their mouths opening silently, their eyes gleaming in the dark. "They remember," Elise said, "all of them, every cut, every needle, every promise." Lee's heart pounded. "I have to go." "You can't leave now," Elise murmured, stepping closer. "You've been seen." Lee stumbled back, tripping over the old camera. It hit the floor with a sharp click and flashed. For an instant, the room was blinding white. When the light faded, the figures were gone. The hum ceased. Only the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the silence. Lee stood alone. She blinked, disoriented, then checked her camera. The digital screen showed the last image it captured, the flash photo. But what it revealed froze her blood. It was her, standing beside Elise, both of them facing the camera. The stitched mask covered Lee's face now, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and behind them Dr. Venn stood, smiling his stitched smile. The timestamp read 1915. When Lee's footage surfaced online weeks later, it was already too late. Her friends uploaded it to prove she'd existed, hoping someone would recognize the place. The video, titled "The Stitched Mask," found footage of St. Emmeline Asylum, spread across the internet in days. Millions watched, commented, dissected every frame. Most called it fake, too cinematic, too perfectly eerie. But a few noticed something no one could explain. At the 47-minute mark, Lee stares into the mirror. In the reflection, the stitched woman moves half a second before Lee does. At the very end of the video, as the screen fades to black, a faint hum can be heard, followed by a woman's whisper, "You promised I'd leave forever." Weeks later, an art historian in Paris received an anonymous package. Inside was a sealed envelope and a single photograph, a modern Polaroid. It showed a woman in a long coat, standing before the ruins of an old asylum. Her face was hidden by a mask of perfect stitches. That same night, the historian dreamed. He was standing in a white room filled with photographs, hundreds of them, pinned from floor to ceiling. In each one, the same woman appeared, Elise Marin, but as he looked closer, he saw her face slowly change, shifting through time, through generations. Each photograph contained a different person, a nurse, a soldier, a photographer, a child, all wearing the same stitched mask, and at the very center of the wall hung a single empty frame. Beneath it, a brass plate engraved with his own name. He woke in a cold sweat, the echo of a hum still vibrating in his ears. The horror of the stitched mask experiment didn't end with Dr. Venn or Elise. It continued in every photograph, every curious eye that looked too long into the past. The experiment was never about reconstructing the face, it was about preserving what humanity couldn't let go of: memory, guilt, the desire to undo loss. But the truth is this: some memories are not meant to be preserved. Some faces are meant to fade. Elise Marin's mask became a mirror for all who feared imperfection and a prison for those who tried to perfect it. As the screen fades, a whisper rises, soft, aching, eternal. Beauty isn't in what's unbroken. It's in what still breathes beneath the scars. And then silence, only the faint sound of a needle pulling thread, stitch, stitch, stitch.